مهارات جديدة والنظر التكييف مهن جديدة. ونعلم أيضا أن أزمة جائحة كورونا أدت إلى تسرع هذا التحول، بيد أنه لا يمكننا التأكد بدقة من المهارات المحددة التي سيحتاج إليها العاملون مستقبلا. متحدثنا اليوم سيقدم التي ستنشأ مع نلقى إلى المهارات اليدوية التي تعتبر أساسية في التعلم والتطور لمدى الحياة lifelong. كما يقود شراكة ماكنزي مع الطاولة المستديرة الأوروبية للصناعين التي تهدف إلى إعادة تأهيل 5 ملايين مواطن أوروبي وتعليمه المهارات اللازمة للعمل في مهن جديدة بحلول 2030. ماركو حائز على ماجستير في إدارة الأعمال من كلية أنسياد عام 2012 وماجستير في الإدارة المالية الاقتصادية من جامعة البوليتكنيك في ميلانو عام 2009. ماركو أيضا مؤلف كتاب الرأسمالية المتضخمة. فليتفضل مشكورا.
You hear me? Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here today, and I will be speaking mostly of some research at McKinsey has led in this topic. Towards the end, I'll also share a bit the reactions we had to that research and some of the recent visits in some of the innovative schools that are attempting to indeed develop these future skills. But let me start with some context. Maybe could someone swap the screen? Starting with some context. So this research, we call it on distinct elements of talent. We wanted to rebrand a bit this concept of soft skills or transversal skills. These are actually talents, the elements that generate talent. The context is that businesses have long complained that graduates don't have the right skills when they enter the workforce. They typically talk about soft skills as a fluid definition, but it's not really the technical skill of the knowledge. It's these sort of soft skills that they often complain about. Future work trends, but also COVID has accelerated the importance of these soft skills, and so our attempt has really been trying to provide clarity. What are these soft skills? Structure these soft skills, like to give them names and in a sort of precise ways and definitions, and then create a case to act on these, because most of the focus is still on knowledge and on technical skills, while the complaint seems to be coming from this area. So today I'll first explore what are these distinct elements of talent. Then I'll move towards really the starting point from the McKinsey research. This was a McKinsey Global Institute analysis that looked across all occupations which individual tasks are automatable, by when they will be automated. And the answer is a lot by occupation. Some will change very little, some will change a lot, but the majority of them will change significantly. So the key message of this initial study was there's going to be much more rapid change than we have experienced in the past. From there, we could create a projection of what jobs will be more in demand in the future and what skills will be needed for each of the tasks that will be remaining, that will not be affected by automation. And as we have seen, we expect to move significantly towards technological skills and social-emotional skills, and to some extent also higher cognitive skills. Now, this is a starting point because at this level, it's still very difficult to talk about what these skills are, right? So most of the next research that we've done is about unpacking what are these higher cognitive skills, what are these social-emotional skills, and what are these technological skills. And we focus not on any specific industry or occupation, but we focus on what are those that are relevant across all of them, that any citizen, independent from the occupation, will actually need in the future. And so this was a starting point. The whole research is around defining and assessing the value of these skills. So we had an online panel of 18,000 respondents. We covered 15 countries. And now I'll share some of both the build-up of this research and some of the findings. Here we start with the selection. We created these concepts for everyone, independently of where they work. And how we identified those, we went through a lot of the research and a lot of the work that McKinsey Academy does with our clients in developing skills in executives and managers. And when we had this tool, we filter them based on these three lenses. One is, does the skill or attitude help humans stay relevant to machines, as machine will increasingly automate some of the activities? The second filter was any of these skills that enable people to succeed in environments that are increasingly digital. The third lens was, given that there's going to be continuous change, any skill and attitude that helps adapting to this change. This is also something that we get in the scope. And so the result, in terms of definition, these are the 56 distinct elements of talent that we selected and we tried to propose definition. And in the article, you'll have the definition for each of these. But let's pause here and explore a bit what these are, right? We divided 4 macro quadrants. As you've seen from before, there's a quadrant which is around the cognitive. Then we split the social-emotional. There are some that are more about self-leadership, and some that are more about interpersonal, so the emotional part and the relationship with others. And then the technological skill, we filter away only those communication. You see there's a part which is about more public speaking and storytelling, but there's also listening. There's the ability to synthesize messages, and everyone's busy, and different time we need to be very crispy synthesizing what's the key message in a short amount of time. Planning and way of working, that's a combination of just developing work plan, but also managing time, managing agility and thinking with agility. And then there's a whole component of mental flexibility, which is around creativity, but also adopting a different perspective, which is oftentimes used important in customer situations, in design situations. There's translating knowledge into different contexts. There's the ability to learn, and of course the adaptability to new situations, but also which is part of mental flexibility. If we move to the self-leadership, here we have 3 groups. There's a whole group on entrepreneurship, which combines driving innovation and change, breaking with orthodoxies, courage, risk-taking, energy, passion, optimism. Then there's a part on goal achievement, where you can see you have great persistence, you have self-development, achievement orientation, and then a part on self-awareness and self-management, which has all the components around understanding oneself, what are our strengths, being self-confident, having self-control regulation. So that covers the self-leadership realm. And then there's another category on interpersonal. So here you have a lot of skills within the teamwork effectiveness, which try to pinpoint what exactly brings good teamwork effectiveness. And you have the fostering of inclusion, resolving conflict, collaboration, empowering others, coaching, motivating a variety of personalities. And in developing a relationship, this is we see is typically a combination of empathy, but also being social and friendly with others, humility, and inspiring trust in others. And then ultimately, there's more mobilizing system is what sometimes people really think of this as leadership, right? Because it's about role modeling, casting inspiring vision, and bringing the organizations with you, understanding how to mobilize big change in organization and how to negotiate. Ultimately, in the digital, as I mentioned, we try to remove anything which is specific of an industry or a job. And so you have the digital fluency and citizenship, which is really the literacy, being able to learn digitally, having digital ethic, and being able to collaborate with digital tools. There's understanding digital systems. This is more about understanding data, how they are created and shared, understanding how smart system works and what's their potential, some basic cybersecurity literacy, and also the ability to connect with understand the potential of technology and connect and speak between people that work in technology and people that work in business. And on using software, here is not everyone needs to be a coder, but some literacy on how code works, and some analysis, some ability to do data analysis, and some computational and algorithmic thinking. This is also something that we feel that is useful in an increasingly digital environment. So that's the map. That's kind of a periodic table of skills, of distinct elements of talent. And once we got to this level of precision, we were able to then move ahead and look at what are the gaps and are these gaps important for society? Here is what we created as a tool for research to understand what the gaps are, right? So this is not, an assessment you would use and give grades to students, but it's enough to say if we have thousands of people taking this test, we know a bit of the gap. And the way we created it, we created some description for each of these elements, and we asked people to choose which description best reflect themselves and how they behave. And then on the back of these, there was a score, 0, 50, 100, and through that way we could convert every skill and attitude to a numerical level of proficiency. And so these were based on a combination of academic literature, but also a lot of the work that we do in ourselves, in teaching others, in organizations. And the important thing is the calibration, right? We calibrated the level of 100 that you'll see in the next pages is not someone that is an expert in these skills, right? It's someone that has that basic level of proficiency that makes them a good future-proof citizen and a good, all the elements to contribute positively to our work society. And so this is what we found when we analyzed all the results from these 18 countries. We saw that the first message is there's a gap to 100, right? We're not there yet on average. And in general, every person wasn't not everyone needs to be 100 on everything, but ideally, being at 100 across all of these would be helpful. So I would say let's consider 100 as the ideal for any individuals. So there's a gap there. The gap is bigger in digital, and the gap is also bigger in some groups within the cognitive realm, the planning way of working and working in agility, in an agile way, but also the ability to communicate effectively with others, synthesizing messages. That was something that was really missing as well. But in the bigger picture is there's a gap that needs to be filled. And then what we did is, let's look if the gap is important. And the first thing that we did is we also asked the respondents their employment status, their level of income in the country that they are, and their job satisfaction. And then we could try, this is not causation, but is holding constant every variable, demographics, and every other specific elements proficiency. So as you can see, there are especially some of these elements that a single shift in proficiency from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 gives a significant increase in the chance of being employed, in the chance to be in the higher income brackets of the country, or in the chance to have high job satisfaction. These are the elements change, right? So for example, in income, the elements are more around cognitive, and so you see work plan development, but also organizational awareness, which is more about interpersonal, self-confidence is about self, so asking the right questions about cognitive as well, including communication. So here, it's a variety of type of deltas that are more linked to income. In employment is more the mental flexibility and self-leadership. You see adaptability, coping with uncertainty, achievement orientation. So those seems to be the ones that are more associated with employment. And on job satisfaction, there's those are specifically the self-leadership. This seems to be job satisfaction really something about you, so self-motivation and wellness, self-confidence, coping with uncertainty, and a bit of sociability, as in your ability to connect with others. Even though all of these deltas seem important, and now I'm starting to share a bit the feedback we received and the additional thinking we've been doing. So this is a bit forward-looking. 56, oftentimes they say, well, it's many of them, right? They can't be all foundational. And so we started to think of hierarchies, right? And at the bottom of the pyramid, you have indeed some technical deltas, right? The digital skills are mostly technical. And these are likely going to change multiple times, right? The software we use are going to change, what we need to do, be able to do digitally is going to change. So to some extent they are needed, but their shelf life is probably not very long, right? So we need to have the basis, but then they continuously change, and probably not the real focus of getting deep. Then there's a layer above, which is more the human deltas, right? Those are the ones that will increasingly demand as machine to make predictable tasks. So in that sense, they have higher shelf life, skills, they are in this bucket, but I think we thought that there is actually an even higher hierarchy, because there are all those skills and attitudes that enable you to continuously learn human skills and technical skills, right? And those are really the focus that, I guess, in the world of education, especially when you start this at a younger age, you need to get right, because you need to get that right mindset of being able to continuously adapt, continuously learn and cope with uncertainty, as well as having the leadership, having the self-awareness, self-development and self-confidence to do so. And so we created this, at least this hierarchy where if you really need to focus on something to get right, which is enabling future learning, it's more on this growth delta. And in fact, when we look back in what are the elements that are most associated and correlated with outcomes across the real outcomes, the ones that we see oftentimes are these growth deltas, right? It is the adaptability, the coping with uncertainty, the self-confidence. So it is those that seems to be really at the center and at a higher level of hierarchy compared to the others. And here I think is the last page on the results, right? And this is somewhat surprising, somewhat concerning. When I share it, typically education systems are actually not surprised. There is in general a strong correlation of the average level of delta of a person to their education attainment. If they have gone to university, they have an average higher level of proficiency across this delta. This is true on average, but on the left you see that there's actually 10 elements of talent where the ability of the fact that someone was going to university to predict whether they have higher proficiency is very low. This means it doesn't seem going all the way to university has any impact on people having developed these elements on the left. And that includes also some elements like coping with uncertainty and self-confidence, which we've seen in the other pages being among the most important ones. And then on the right, you see there are some elements which are highly correlated with education and with the ability of people to go all the way to university. A couple of them, though, they're highly correlated, but there's some negative coefficients. So especially on inspiring trust and on humility, we found that people that go all the way to university tend to be correlated with lower level of inspiring trust and humility. And so when we think of, does this matter? Like now I plot in this chart all these deltas that either had no or negative correlation with education attainment. And imagine how much innovation more you could get if people in general were more creative, imaginative, courageous, risk takers. On the productivity side, imagine how much productivity if people are able to resolve conflict between teams and people, to synthesize messages, to coach others, and be decisive and having an ownership mindset. Imagine the common humanity we can create if people were in general more trustworthy, more empathetic with each other. And again, on well-being, imagine the well-being, the individual well-being of everyone, if we're all more humble, maintaining digital ethics, comfortable with uncertainty and self-confidence. And so this is to say that these gaps do matter for a variety of reasons. And I'll share with you some emerging approaches, but also some barriers to why this is not happening in schools, and this is true in K-12, in universities. We've engaged oftentimes, and this is what I can share, we have engaged with also innovative education systems, like which are mentioned, and they're not surprised, right? They say, we focus a lot on the academics, the higher cognitives, of course, we cover the digital, they happen in the meantime, but we don't really intentionally develop the self-leadership and the interpersonal. And so they're not surprised that these are the parts where there's not as much correlation between education attainment and efficiency. So four different ways that I've seen individual education players, so a single university, a single high school system, trying to incorporate these deltas. The first is creating a separate course or an after-school program or career programs, especially in universities, where they say, look, my curriculum is already structured, I don't want to touch it like that, let me create something separate that fills this gap. So all of these skills and attitudes are developed there. Some are short, some are longer, like some go on 7 years in parallel to the education system, some are more 6 months before you finish university so that you get ready to meet the employers. The second is adding specific disciplinary subjects that seems to be conducive to develop some of these. One is psychology, or a lot of subjects related to psychology, because that goes a lot into how we think, personalities, how we behave with others, and so there's a lot of awareness that studies of psychologists, it doesn't have to be core to psychology, but there's management, decision making, psychology management, and there's a lot of these subjects that bring awareness on a lot of these self-leadership, interpersonal skills, and how we think, biases, and so on. And then negotiation is an example of one specific delta where you can create a class of negotiation, and that's a subject of negotiation. The third way is really trying to embed both the development and assessment throughout an education program. And so that means taking the whole curriculum, looking at where these skills, where these deltas are already being developed, and trying to add different learning formats. Group work is one, for example, that oftentimes is used to develop a lot of interpersonal skills, but it's not just about putting people in the group. It's, for example, combining people with very different personalities and forcing clashes. It's being very intentional in how do we create learning formats and the situation that these skills and attitudes develop naturally. And sometimes bringing in professionals, especially in group work, sometimes, especially in universities or business schools that can afford it, they can bring in personal coaches to help with this. But even in K-12 systems, there are some models that I'll talk later that have mostly retrained teachers in being personal coaches, and what it mostly focuses on coaching and tutoring, and the teaching is done through an online system and through curriculum master expert that respond to the knowledge, but the in-class personnel is basically coaches. And then the fourth way is some systems are trying to mobilize students in self-development journey. And this is because many of these attitudes and skills are really about changing who we are, how we see the world. And it's not easy when someone tells you you need to change. It's much more effective when people are brought counsel, data, test, and they themselves decide, I want to focus on this. And then the system provides some constructs, whether it's peer feedback, whether there's a skill of the week to talk about, and resources for the students to help self-develop. But it's much more self-driven. In any of these, what we noticed that the idea of having a similar taxonomy to this, and one time we adopted this, because what I showed you is more thinking of the workforce and what we see in the world of work. But some education systems, especially in K-12, they would want to add other skills and not focus on others, right? So we have created, for example, a taxonomy for an education system at K-12. And typically what this seems to be really helpful is once you have this taxonomy at this level of granularity, you can meta tag the different components, the different portion of assessment, so that you exactly know where you are developing what. And you can also measure in the future, is my intention being successful? Like, do I see progress by having this group work or not? And where do I see progress and not? So creating a system to know through these meta tags and this granular taxonomy is something that helps continuously improve the education systems. Now I'll speak of some barriers, because there are many interrelated challenges that limit, especially, forget the technical, but the non-technical deltas at scale, it's not easy. So there's some on the demand side, and so what we heard the most is, to some extent, the employers, they are not yet able to articulate what drive value and what they need. When we ask, mostly they say, yes, I look at teamwork, yes, I want people that are able to communicate, but they don't go much deeper than that. And oftentimes, the recruiters themselves, some of them are not expert in this, right? So they don't even know what makes their teammates most effective. So there's this lack of knowledge and lack of ability of articulating exactly what employers need in the hiring situations, which is difficult, because then it drives universities themselves to focus less on these. When I speak to business schools, they say, by now it's clear they want some of these leadership traits. It's clear they want the ability to work in teams. So employers have been able to articulate, and I've reacted. Now they are in my system, in my programs. But many of the self-leadership skills, for example, they are not as articulate. Same with some of the cognitive skills and some of the personal skills. The second is the limited importance that universities give to these skills in the admission process, and this is, of course, the K-12. high school system, especially the highest performing one, they say, does this get like my students to universities? And if the universities are not able to focus on this in the admission process, then the K-12 system has a pressure to not prioritize this, and they prioritize the standard knowledge that can be assessed, so you can have credentials and that universities value. Moving to the supply side, some of the challenges are the diversity in the starting proficiency and mindset of the students. This is especially true when thinking of universities, business schools, but also high school systems. Because at university level is about the value of an investment, right? If I invest to develop these skills, it's a good investment if I have all of my students that positively engage. And typically some engage well, some engage less well, because they come from education systems that are different. So some that are not ready to engage in developing some, especially on the and on the interpersonal skills. The second one is that many of the curriculums are very overcrowded with disciplinary knowledge. There are some systems that work up to, some schools, they have kids that work up to 60 hours a week. And so saying, I need to also fit in this, they start saying, where do I fit this? That's also a challenge of students' well-being that we need to keep in mind. The third one is and this is especially true in countries, I had a chat in Pakistan, and when you think of the sheer size of education and all the teachers or coaches that you need to have, they're struggling to have teachers to cover the basics. Like how do we develop teachers and coaches at this level of scale to also develop these skills? And so this is one of the challenges that we have heard. And last one is there's a bit of a slow pace of knowledge transfer on how to develop and assess these deltas. And the reason is part of it you see in the middle. There's lack of a common language, and therefore even things like critical thinking and problem solving, everyone has their own definition. Leadership, everyone has their own definition of leadership, instead of going deeper in what are the key elements of leadership. And without that common language, it's difficult to transfer knowledge on how do you actually develop and assess these deltas. And the last one I'll mention in the black zone is that ultimately the assessment, it's really difficult, and therefore the fact that it doesn't exist today really a way to reliably assess and provide accuracy that employer value on these skills. It's difficult to know what works. It's difficult to say I should invest in this because it's difficult to prove that a system is moving people from A to B. And so these are, I guess, is a set of challenges. But let me close on a positive note with some of the innovations that I've seen that are indeed focusing on developing in this delta with some success. And I think there's three main directions which might have system-level impact. And this is my last page, so then it's the floor is all yours. The first is there's some alternative education models, more or less, don't want to use the word disruptive, but more or less far from the conventional education model. I think some of these are familiar to you. There's the IB, there's Montessori, and they have already gone into, IB I think is between 5,000 schools now, Montessori has 20,000 schools. So those are more focusing on more pedagogies that are more inquiry-based, and through that they cover some of these skills. And they also say, we want to really focus on some of these deltas. Having spoken and worked with some of them, they know that it works. They don't know if this works for all the deltas and also how it works. Then there's a group that is more, I think the Minerva, the Brave Generation Academy, which is very recent, but it's scaling very fast, which shift more to the hybrid approach, right? Like let's focus really, let's really implement the flipped classroom. I get the students to choose when they want to learn, how long they want to learn. I give them access to technology and the peer support and the support from experts in each of the disciplines. But then when they come to schools, it's about coaching, it's about the tutors personalizing activities for them, for their preferences. And you can see that the tutors in class, they really establish a relationship with these students. They know them and they adapt the day-to-day based on their needs. And so that seems to be the fact that people need to figure out themselves, do things at their own pace, it changes their mindset, it makes them much more engaged, and they seem to develop a lot of these skills. Now, they can't exactly say, again, which skills have been developed or not, but clearly there's an impact. And maybe the impact is most visible in the later one. I think a call for it to RBK are two examples of more either alternative or post the traditional education, where in a call for it to, there's again no teachers, it's all about the technology. They need to figure out in a variety of challenges just Googling things, and everyone that comes out of a call for it to has a job before even the course is finished, and that's mostly on software development and different occupations in the technology space. And a reboot camp is similarly, it's much more project-based, and people need to figure out how to solve challenges. And I think the common theme is there's the shift of focus on students figuring out, on having to figure out on their own, making their own choices, being put on significant challenges, often in team, and in the process of figuring these out, they learn how to accomplish things, how to work together, and they shift to a mindset of, I can do these things, I don't need to just listen to whatever someone is telling me whenever they want to tell me. And so this empowerment seems to be the common trait, especially of the most innovative, that still have to prove scale, but the most innovative systems seem to be going after this. And this is the same that happens with the complementary after school programs, right? So I think the theory of two is the education system, if it's too big and too slow to change, what we can do is creating some exceptional after-school programs. Best Robotic is the biggest in the US. It is present in 18,000 schools. The TUMO it started in Armenia, now is expanding in Europe and in the Middle East. But the idea is having a set of projects, group projects, challenges, things that students want to do and need to, like shifting, adding basically the need to accomplish something and work together. And so the idea is you keep the traditional education, you keep improving it, but you keep it relatively traditional, but then you complement it with after-school to cover everything that the traditional education doesn't cover. And then the third is more on, there's a lot of organization, everyone is trying to be better at assessing some of these deltas. The OECD, of course, is the reference for education, and they have shifted also to collaborative problem solving, and they're also testing that in their PISA. But many of these organizations either do it to help employers recruit. McKinsey we have ourselves built a very game-based way of assessing problem-solving skills, which we use for our own recruiting. And so there's a lot of movements towards how can we become better at assessing these skills. And you can imagine if this was widespread and OECD was able, for example, to develop a reliable assessment for all of these skills, and you start publishing the results, that is something that can drive the whole education system, as it has happened with the PISA results for science reading and PISA science reading and math, yes, of course. And so this is what I leave you with. There's a lot of innovation out there. I think there's a lot of opportunities to scale these innovations and help coordinating a shift, which is quite important because this is not a new challenge. I think that the complaints on the lack of these skills it's decades long. It's just becoming more important and critical that we solve this, and I think you will have a part to play.
Thank you, Marco, for this great presentation and the projects you are running. Maybe for the sake of the audience, it's good to mention which countries that study has been done.
Yes, so the 15 countries, it was an online panel, right? So it included Qatar was one of the countries. There was 3 countries in the Middle East. There were, I think, 4 in Europe. There was the US, Canada, Mexico. There was Australia, China. So we tried to cover a bit most part of the world, but it's more out of. So we haven't published any country results because the research tool was not built to be comparing countries. and the language translation, so it was relatively lengthy, the test, and therefore the language translation was a challenge. We have used it for seeing common trends within the countries, but not for cross-country comparison.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I guess the floor is open for any questions from the audience, and please raise your hand if you have a question. You may ask your question in English or in Arabic. Dr. Salim.
Thanks for the presentation. My question, I was really surprised to see the correlation between creativity, imagination, and innovation. So it's the negative side. Did I read it right, and why?
I think you're referring to this page, right? Okay, so this is showing a limited correlation. So the exercise was the following. We tried to predict from the proficiency across these elements if an individual was in university, in high school, like stopped at university, stopped at high school, or stopped earlier. And so what you see, the number you see here, is how much better the model that we could create. We created a 3 statistical model, and the best model we could create, basically, had only 40% chance of getting it right. And when you have 0, 1, or 2 as the proficiency level, it basically is saying pure chances that are 3% if you try to guess, and 7 is basically saying there's only a very limited predictive power of knowing that a person has a higher creativity and imagination to predicting if the person has actually gone all the way to university. And so I guess many of these are, to me, they were surprising at first, but I was also surprised that when sharing this with many schools, they weren't, because they say we don't intentionally focus so much on the left as much as on all the academic and cognitive skills.
Thank you. Got a question from the back there. And then.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights and interesting information. My question is about coaching with younger ages, and the other one is about the programs. Is there any program provided in Arabic or within the Arabic region? Sorry, I missed that. I thought you mentioned develop, but was it in Arabic or more information? Thank you, sir.
So on the coaching, I have never seen coaching done before the age of 12 in schools. I think Montessori does, it's not coaching, it's more of like, facilitating, right? But the role of a coach or a tutor, I think I've seen it more from 12 and above. And also the idea of really flipping the classroom is something that I've seen more from 12 and above. Although, I mean, if you go to a Montessori school, you'll see that it's very different, right? And there's left much more room to children to explore, and the teachers have more of a role of facilitators. So on any of these programs in the Arabic language, I think the innovative one that I mentioned, I think the call for it probably is, that's much higher, like it's from, I think, 16 or 18 years old and above. I think they have opened some campuses in the Middle East region. I think Tumo was born in Armenia, and so I think it has also expanded in some Middle Eastern countries. I know that the IB and Montessori, there are schools here. I think the IB, though, I can't remember if they also teach in Arabic or the schools has to be international. And Montessori, it's both Montessori and Reggio Emilia actually, they're not really certified, right? So there might be some schools that are inspired by Montessori or Reggio Emilia, which happen to be teaching in Arabic.
Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. I have quite a bit of comments and maybe some notes. I see you move into the solutions outside the boundaries of higher education, because when you gave me this list of companies, or list of alternative, yes, if you could, yes, if you look at the alternative education models, none of them are higher ed. These are all private sectors and not higher education. Are you proposing, this is one of the questions, that higher education are not a part of this futuristic solutions? And so, I'm not sure if that's the case. On the skills, future skills, I see very broad and very general, because you're taking a survey, not in specific terms. You're telling me future skills has to be creative and critical thinking. What are the specific indicators of those critical thinking aspects? Because they are broad. If you go to higher eds, they're all implementing a lot of these aspects of you're talking about. But I don't see the specific map to what are those specific skills you're referring to. Everybody knows that artificial intelligence, digital world is coming with the flexibility. What are higher eds are doing, higher education institutions, to resolve some of these issues? Thank you.
So first, just to frame, this page wanted to be more innovative by definition, right? So here I just put the things that are a bit more further away. Not to say, of course, the core education system has a role. It's more for inspiration of the traditional education from some of these more different, right? It doesn't mean necessarily they are more innovative, but they're different. And so that was what I put in this page. There's no, it's the ones that I know that and I could speak of. Forward College, by the way, it is a higher education institute. It's a small new university that just emerged, so that is kind of more a traditional university, just working in a different way. So in that sense, it's by no means trying to say this is the way. It's more like there's a lot of inspiration that the education system can take for some of these more different approaches to education. On the question on the map and on what universities are doing. So I had a roundtable with 20 deans of universities in Europe about 2 months ago to ask them, because even the question of what of these is the role of universities, because this map is big. Universities have professors who do a lot of research. They have a lot of technical knowledge, and it's not easy. This is not easy to do, and it costs money to do it in universities, right? So we had a lot of this discussion. Let me try to give you the summary. I think the one that are closest to the world of business, the business schools, the one that are executive education, those are much more already starting to work, especially on the staff leadership and on the teamwork. I think the group work, I would say many universities have started to have activities that are going to try to develop the dynamics. So in that sense, the universities that are not doing yet, they felt that we're probably a bit behind. And so this is, I think, the challenge that I raise is, again, the ones on how to assess this, the challenge of many of these are actually better developed by the employers, or some of these I can engage my students only if the employers come here and explain why these skills are important. So this is how the discussion was going. On what specific critical thinking of what specifically are the skills and where we develop it in the various activities and courses. I think this is a bit the task of universities to do, right? Like I think many universities now, or at least I know a few that have started to be more systematic in saying, where do I develop these aptitudes or these skills in some of the activities and programs that I have. Some are even thinking of how do I give students the ability to choose a career anchor, see what career anchor is, what are the skills and aptitudes most needed, and also the technical skills more needed for that career anchor, and then create a program packaging all the different electives so that it's more likely that the student is going to move towards that anchor, right? So I think I think the universities, some are trying to do this mapping exercise, but I think the feedback was for sure fact that I can't assess them and employers can't assess them makes it less of a priority, especially for the non-business oriented schools. And there were discussions on most of my teachers are professors. The focus is research. They are happy to do the technical. It's unclear how we also bring this into the mix. So some universities are really struggling with this, and they are deprioritizing them.
Thank you for the
For the sake of time, we have 3 questions. Yes.
Yes, please. Thank you for giving us such an opportunity. I'm Hatim Sebi from the evaluation, the administration or evaluation of schools. And thanks actually to our administration for giving us prior trainings regarding the same topic. As for the topic which is developing future skills, actually each of us is born in some areas and weaknesses in others. My question is how to narrow the divide between each other, not actually or has knowledge of what we have already addressed. Thank you.
Great question. I think it's unclear whether everyone should be, great in all of these skills. I think what the position we took is that there is some level of basic proficiency that is useful for everyone. I think we also oftentimes take the position of work on your strengths, and I think this is also what some of the systems that allow, some of the schools and systems that allow more personalization of the activities and the studies of the students to play on their strengths help. The question is also different between skills and attitudes, and this, sorry, I mix them with the distinctive elements of talent, but I think now we need to, based on your question, divide them, right? There's a whole study on personality traits, character, attitudes, and those indeed, if you're very far from being empathetic, you may get to the basics, but you need to work to a level where people don't consider you difficult to engage, or someone that becomes a manager and a leader that doesn't care for others. So you need to have the basic. You'll never become the most empathetic person. You shouldn't probably become a nurse or a doctor, for example. So in that sense, I think when you look at the personality traits and characters, that's where the orientation and playing on your strengths become very important. I think the more we focus on the skills that with the practice, and I think to some extent you cover also the character and the attitude with enough practice, right? I think there's a nice Intellecti Academy here. It's a startup that basically has a be do become. It basically is like try to do more and be more of a certain, if you want to be kind, just try to practice it, even if it feels odd for you. But the more you practice it, ultimately you become that person, right? So in that sense, there are also some directions of even personality and attitudes. You force yourself enough, you can progress. But in skills in particularly, these are, the more you put them in practice and the more you exercise them, the more you can develop them, right? So I would say a bit of both. Play indeed on your strength. Have the basics on a variety of these, but these can be developed. And I think studies are showing that even if it becomes increasingly difficult, especially after 30, it becomes really difficult, the plasticity of the brain and so on, but it is possible still. And up until age 30, I mean, that's still a long life for, this is the whole part of universities and postgraduate education. So there's really potential to develop these.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Khaled Marco, for sharing the results and this interesting presentation. My question is closely related to what my colleague has asked, which has to do with skills. It was interesting to see that the soft skills are becoming as or more important than the technical skills in the workplace. What we have noticed is that people who have technical background or technical skills sometimes tend to have less soft skills. Is there a compromise that has to be taken so that, if I want to develop my soft skills, I have to focus less on my technical skills? So that's the first question, if you have noticed that in your research. And the second thing has to do with what Dr. Abdullah asked. Is there a gap in the higher education in terms of developing the soft skills? We have seen recently that the K-12 is actually catering for soft skills development. But maybe in higher education, the focus becomes more heavy on the technical aspect for skills. And then when you go to the workplace, you discover that you need both skills actually to go and get a better job at higher pay. So do you think there's a gap in higher education, and what would be the solution for that? Thank you.
So I'll share, probably I can't fully answer either of the question, but let me try to give at least an opinion on the first, right? Is there a trade-off? From what I've seen, at least from this research, there isn't necessarily one, right? Because the people that seems to have higher income as, for example, both some of the cognitive skills that enable them to also be excellent in academics and technical skills, and some of the others, right? Skills. So I think in that sense, I don't see necessarily a trade-off. And if I also think of some of the models where the self-leadership and interpersonal skills are developed while also working on the content, right? And this is the part which I think is important. I haven't seen really effective, with few exceptions of negotiation, for example, but I haven't seen effective models where, let's have a class about empathy, and so therefore you talk about it and the curriculum has an empathy model, right? They need to be contextualized and embedded into activities that are relevant, whether it's a group project on creating something for a community to solve a problem in the community. You can learn a lot of the content as well, that if you pick the problems that require the technical knowledge and the technical capabilities to solve them, but in the way you create the activities, you also develop some of the other skills. So I think that the answer to that is we probably shouldn't think about the curriculum is full, I need to add another piece, but more how do I retrofit some of the activities so that I not only cover the technical, but I also cover some of these skills. So I think that's on the first question. On the second, it was on the universities versus high school, like where is the best time to work on this, right? Look, it's strictly, I'm referring mostly to the discussion we had on the roundtable of universities, right? When I asked should universities consider changing their admission process to select these, and that was the link to say, should you focus only on the technical and say they need to have developed these? I guess their answer was again it's tricky to do, how do I assess it, right? So they can't do that. At the same time, the employers are asking, so they're a bit in this challenge, right? Should I do this? Should the employers do it? Should the high school do it? So that's what I heard. Look, the thing is, I understand let me make another example maybe. I think many of these, they call for it to reboot camp, but also I work a lot in reskilling, right? Like in adult reskilling. And so there are some programs where they are selecting people based on purely the soft skills, and they say if they have the mindset, if they have the drive, if they want to achieve something, if they can work with others, then in 12 weeks, I can make them a great software developer that gets the job. And so every one of those are basically saying, I'm a glorified recruiting agency. I'm able to pick somehow who has those skills, and then the technical doesn't matter, I teach the technical. So you could argue that if you go in this direction, then you really hope though that the K-12 system has worked on those, right, and has developed those, because otherwise you have some people that just want to be admitted in any university that starts from it this way, right? So I think it's a bit of the challenge. I think is everyone needs to think of, given the programs that I have, which are the ones that at least I can enter into the program more easily. It's going to take many years. This is not something that is going to solve in years, right? Because the K-12, the university, and the employers, they need to both evolve and progress. And as each learn from each other, I think this will move. But it's unfortunately it's not a 1 or 2 years type of transformation.
Marco, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to know more about your thoughts about what this all means in our local economy, especially the validity and the relative importance of the visitors. To expand more, I understand how they are, very important and very dynamic, very diversified, liberal economies, like Singapore, some other countries which have a similar economic system. But in our local countries, especially Qatar, does it have do they have the same validity and importance and near and long-term future? And what does this all means also implications for our school and higher education?
I'll try to answer knowing that I'm not an expert in the Qatar system specifically, so I'll try to do my best. But few ways of thinking on how to answer your question. One is if I think of the first very research that McKinsey did on how are the jobs going to change in the future, the trends were different. Very similar across countries. The difference was the pace. So depending on the wage and advancement of technology, the pace of change was different, but the trend in terms of what sectors and what jobs would grow and change, it was similar. So in that sense, you would argue that overall the trend seems to be similar. Now, the second way of thinking though is in Qatar you have for sure a lot of experts, I assume, because and so you also have an expert community that come work. I don't know enough on how long they stay, are they all the same, so I don't know if you're relying anyway on the education system of other countries, and so that may play or not a component, I don't know. But there's definitely also these skills are also very important in managerial and leadership position, right? And this is what I want to highlight. Where these have already fully entered the, if you want, education system, is the executive education system, and is, for example, I think the McKinsey Academy that works with the executives and with managers, I don't think they work on anything which is not this man. Very little. And so in that sense, this is what ultimately executives and managers need, and they're everywhere, right? Like I'm sure you have many of them in Qatar as well. So in that sense, I think it does. It is important because this is what ultimately they'll be asking later on when they're in their 40s and 50s.
Thank you. I have the last question from the floor. Written questions. First, they thanking you for the lecture. Then the question is, I am still asking, what are the jobs that you think that will be, will be no need for the future? And what are those that there will be more required?
So I'll start with the latter because, and this is, I work mostly in Europe, and one of the things we are looking at is creating short reskilling programs for adults that were in occupations that are no longer in demand and need to transition into a new one, right? So in that sense, the ones that more often come as they are already in need and they will be more needed in the future are in the space of technology. And so let me give you some examples, right? The software developers, healthcare because it's an aging population in Europe, so there's always a shortage of healthcare professionals. And then, depending on the country, so by the way, construction is also still very much in need. So the construction sector seems to be still growing, especially in Europe. And so in Spain, we ran an analysis. I think there was 600,000 additional workers in by 2030 only on construction. And then in education, it's in some countries there's a big shortage and that will grow. But in some countries in Europe, since there's a declining population, it's not as so that's a trend that depending on the country, it's either in demand or not. Some of the occupations that I see, I guess this has been the most. I think oftentimes we have programs where banks are closing branches, so anyone that is moving away from brick and mortar to online, I think these are still the biggest trigger of populations becoming in less need. And so I would say bank branches, retail shops, those two are really the biggest ones for now.
This is also, it's another question, it's just saying that there are certain, things that we emphasize in our education, which are critical thinking, problem solving, research, collaborations, communications, and language, skills and mathematical skills. So I think the question is whether, this is enough or there will be something else.
So I would say there is probably something else, which I think you've seen from the presentation I made. I think if I follow, those are mostly in the cognitive area, and it's what I think most education system starts from. There are a few that are in the self-leadership and in the interpersonal, but I think from an education perspective, I think Singapore has recently published their core skills, which are probably the closest and they mirror as closely as I've seen these deltas. And so, and that's for probably an education angle. So I think it's I would say it probably would need to be expanded a bit, and some countries are expanding that core focus of education into something closer to these dimensions that I've mentioned.
Thank you. I'll give myself, if you allow me, Marco, to give you a very good example that I wanted to. I'm a geneticist, medical geneticist, okay? So when, in the 80s, when genetics comes, it was not appreciated by the medical fields. And they were thinking like, now, put it after a class. We cannot remove anatomy or something and put genetics in a medical curriculum. But gradually, this thing expanded and expanded. It went to schools, it went to the university. Now they have programs in university in genetics and the branches of genetics. And finally, now we are thinking of personalized medicines and all of this. So gradually, I think the same thing. We will go through the certain things till we have. But we have to capture it as it grow and nourish in the societies. I'd like to thank you very much for your speech. I think we all get benefits from this, and I'd like to tell everybody, if you're interested in having a copy of the presentation, please email me or email the ministry. We can always send you, because I know there was a lot of details that we can get benefit out of this study. Once again, thank you very much. And there is a small trophy from the Ministry of Education for you. If you're running for